Ethan sat stiffly at the far end of a long mahogany dining table, his fingers nervously tracing the rim of a crystal glass he didn't dare drink from. The chandeliers above cast warm light across gold-framed paintings, their silent faces watching him as though judging every breath he took. Across from him sat Eleanor Whitmore, 71 years old, yet with an elegance that made her presence impossible to ignore. Her silver hair was swept into a bun, a single diamond pin glinting in the light. Her hands were fragile, the skin translucent, but her gaze was unwavering, sharp, almost youthful in its intensity. "You think I'm mad, don't you?" she asked suddenly, her voice calm but tinged with amusement. Ethan startled, blinking. "I know, he faltered, unsure how to speak his truth. He was 24, broke and barely able to afford rent. Every rational voice in his head screamed that this was absurd. But when he looked at her, he didn't see desperation, he saw loneliness. Eleanor leaned forward. "I've had fortune, I've had power, I've had society's admiration. None of it means a thing when you eat dinner, alone every night in a house with 20 empty rooms." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I don't want a lover, Ethan, I want a companion. Someone who sees me, not the millions, not the name, just me." Ethan's throat tightened. He thought of the dingy apartment he shared with 2 other students, of nights skipping meals to save money for textbooks, of the gnawing fear that his dreams would collapse under the weight of poverty. "Why me?" he finally whispered. "Because you listened," Eleanor said softly. "At the library, you didn't see a tired old woman. You saw a student. You treated me like I mattered." Her eyes glistened. "That is rarer than gold." And in that moment, despite the voices that would sneer and scoff, Ethan nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'll marry you." The first days of marriage felt like stepping into a dream Ethan wasn't sure he belonged in. The mansion itself was overwhelming. Polished floors that echoed his footsteps, staircases that seemed to lead nowhere, halls lined with portraits of ancestors, whose stern faces looked down on him with suspicion. Yet Eleanor herself was nothing like the house. She insisted they eat breakfast in the sunroom, where the light spilled over ivy climbing the glass. She laughed when he offered to pour her tea, teasing that he had the manners of a Victorian gentleman. When Ethan expected caviar and champagne, she asked instead for scrambled eggs and toast. When he thought she'd drag him to charity galas, she chose to stay in and watch black and white films, leaning back in her velvet chair as she quoted lines from memory. Still, Ethan felt unsettled. At night, when the halls grew silent, he'd wander. The house was too large, too full of secrets. He discovered wings of the mansion that seemed untouched, with locked doors and curtains drawn tight against the world. On the 7th night, the mansion was as silent as a cathedral. Ethan couldn't sleep, his mind tangled in questions. The laughter they shared during the day was real. He knew it was. But so were the shadows Eleanor carried when she thought no one was watching. Drawn like a moth to flame, he found himself again in the east corridor. The oak door loomed at the far end, its chains catching faint moonlight streaming through a tall window. His pulse raced, but curiosity gnawed harder than fear. From his pocket, Ethan pulled a small tool, a leftover from fixing his rickety bike back in his student days. With trembling hands, he wedged it into the lock. The click of metal surrendering echoed far too loud in the silence. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The room smelled faintly of turpentine and old canvas. Dust floated in the moonlight, and rows of draped shapes lined the walls. He hesitated, then pulled a cloth from the nearest frame. His stomach dropped. It was him, a painting of himself no older than 18, sitting on a park bench sketching, sunlight glinting off his hair exactly as he remembered that summer day. His knees went weak. He staggered to the next canvas, him at 12, playing near the school fountain, eyes full of wonder. Another at 20, hunched over a sketchbook in his mother's tiny kitchen, the flickering bulb above barely illuminating his paper. Dozens of paintings, dozens of him. The brushstrokes carried tenderness, as though every detail of his face had been memorized, his expressions, his struggles, even moments he thought no one had ever noticed. Ethan stumbled back, breath ragged. No, this isn't possible. How could she? His voice broke, swallowed by the silence of the gallery. A voice behind him, calm but laced with sorrow, broke the silence. "You weren't supposed to see this yet." Ethan whipped around. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her silk robe trailing on the floor, her face pale but composed. For a moment, the moonlight behind her made her look almost ethereal, His words tumbled out raw and broken. Why? Why are there paintings of me, of my life? How could you know these things? Eleanor stepped into the room, her eyes not on the paintings, but on him. Because I've been watching you, not with malice, Ethan, but with love. He shook his head, confused, heart hammering. Love? We only met weeks ago. No, her voice softened. I knew you long before then. You didn't know my name, but I was there in the shadows of your struggles. Every scholarship form that mysteriously came through. Every box of art supplies you thought was from a campus fund. Every tuition extension you thought was luck. She placed a trembling hand over her chest. It was me. I was your patron. I couldn't stand to watch brilliance be smothered by poverty. Ethan's knees nearly gave out. He pressed a hand to the wall, overwhelmed. But why me?